Some chase greatness, others build it. From the heart of New York, where every possession feels like destiny, comes the pulse, the fire, the relentless Redstorm. This is not a podcast. This is a proving ground. A battlefield where fans become family, where voices clash, truth bleeds through passion, and loyalty is not spoken, it's lived. We are here to question, to challenge, to ignite, to ask not what St. John's was, but what it's about to become. Led by Coach Pitino's vision, fueled by the city's soul, driven by fans who never back down. Because here, we don't whisper opinions, we declare war with words. Every debate, every drop of sweat, every heartbeat, this is Redstorm Nation Unfiltered. You just stepped into Relentless Redstorm. Welcome back to the Relentless Redstorm, where intensity meets insight. Tonight, we break down one of the most electric early season clashes, St. John's versus Alabama, a game that felt less like November and more like March Madness previewing itself. Derrel, I have to tell you, being at that game, the electricity in the building was absolutely a March feeling of madness. And the most important thing that I took away from the game, we're going to get into it here, but for me, it was that both teams were playing at the highest level of effort and emotional resilience that I think any individual player could manage in November. The intensity was absolutely on point with a late February, early March game. And the fact that it's only the second game of the season, I think the fans got an absolutely terrific preview of what to expect for the rest of the season.
Well, the atmosphere was incredible. I would say, though it was an intense atmosphere, it certainly didn't have the importance of a late February conference tournament, NCAA tournament game, though it obviously will have ramifications on the season. While both teams played well offensively, both teams played horrific defensively. Rick Pitino, dug into his team about the inability to guard the Alabama guards from the perimeter. Oates dug into his team about their ability to not play defense without fouling. But one of the good things that you get when you have a game this early in the season with top teams playing each other is you get you can see the flaws exposed on both teams. I mean, the 40 free throw attempts that St. John's took in a 40-minute game was incredible. It showed their desire to get to the basket, to pound the ball inside. I'm not going to question a Naismith Hall of Famer like Pitino often, but I do think him bringing Ian Jackson off the bench instead of starting him could have possibly cost St. John's the game. He started the first game against Quinnipiac, but then he brought him off the bench in the second half. He was asked about that in the Quinnipiac game, and he talked about, it being a big lead and it lacking importance, but he brought him off the bench again for the second straight quarter, the first game this season. And the impact he had when he started the second half was clear. Rick himself said he has the most upside of anyone on the team. You have to put that guy on the floor when you're playing a team just as talented as you are.
Yeah, I have to agree with you that Ian Jackson seemed like he would have been the better choice to start the game, especially against the Alabama guards. And in the second half, St. John's did outscore Alabama. So that's one of the things that people will bring up is the fact that St. John's did have a better second half, and they came all the way back to take the lead. However, there are a couple of things here that have to be pointed out, and one of them is the fact that the first half domination of St. John's front court was precision. Both Ejiofor and Hopkins were not only executing away from the rim, they were executing at the rim. And to your point, St. John's recognized they got Alabama into foul trouble early and just kept pounding the ball inside. In the second half, for some reason, they chose to get away from that. And especially once they got the lead, this is where Pitino himself said we made some mistakes. And I think one of them was the guards chose to try and keep up the tempo to match the Alabama guards who were playing absolutely phenomenal. So LeBaron Philon had probably the best game you could have as a guard against a defense like St. John's, not turning the ball over, having 25 points, having 4 or 5 assists, and just absolutely dominating the game from every aspect. He played up-tempo, he played resilient, and when it mattered, when Alabama lost the lead, there he was, bringing it right back up the court and making sure that Alabama didn't get behind. So the credit that I give to Nate Oates and to the Alabama guards is also to the fact that they played against one of the best defenses in the league. And right now, you're absolutely right. They didn't play their best defense. Right now, it's early November. St. John's, as a team is still just getting to know each other and really feel each other out. This was absolutely, a high stakes game early in the season for both teams. And I want to bring a couple of fan comments here to that point. One fan said that was a great battle, fantastic game on both sides. Good luck with the rest of your season. St. John's roll tide, obviously an Alabama fan. Awesome game to watch, like a tournament game in early season. Another fan said, great game against St. John's and the refs. Most teams would have folded. Really proud of all the guys and the coaching. Next up, Purdue. That was Joey Humphrey, 4.536. And my point here, Derrel, is that there were mistakes on both sides, absolutely. But the level of play that the fans got to see, the fact that Alabama was going up against Purdue next, the fact that St. John still has Kentucky and Iowa and, a lot of early season tests. They're going to the Nevada tournament. I think this was a terrific game for both teams to sharpen against each other. And yes, Alabama was the winner, and the outcome went in their favor. And obviously, in the polls, they jumped up dramatically, and St. John's fell dramatically. I mean, going from 5 to 13 is a huge drop. And I think that's also one of the, sort of misnomers here is that people thought that Alabama wasn't as good as a team as they are. And they showed everybody they're actually better than a lot of people think they are.
Absolutely. And yes, it is a dramatic fall in Alabama rose a lot. I think when you look at St. John's, and I don't want to say they're a paper tiger at this point in the season, but when you lose a game at your off-campus home, Madison Square Garden, when you give up 103 points, despite the fact that you scored 96 points, which is great, but I didn't think they would fall out of the top 10, but you know what? Ultimately, ranking is based on what you do on the basketball court. So if St. John's can rebound, and when they go to Las Vegas and play 4 games in 4 days, if they can come out 3-1, maybe even 4-0, and beat some of the top 25 teams that will be in that tournament, they will jump in the AP top 25. If they go 2-2, 1-3, who knows? They may fall out of the top 25. So that early season conference tournament, 4 games in 4 days in Las Vegas, November 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th, will say a lot about what this St. John's team is now. But I will keep saying this. Rick Pitino has the cauldron. He's mixing everything together. He doesn't know what lineups work the best. Yes, he sees them in practice, but game experience is what he needs to see. He needs to see how the players play together. I love the way that the chemistry that Zuby and Hopkins have early on in the season. And that's only going to get better. We have to see more of Ian Jackson with those guys. We have to see the best talent on the team play together. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But you can't figure that out by not playing Ian Jackson. He most certainly has to play with Zuby, has to play with Hopkins, especially when you're playing these most talented teams. But the best possible outcome for this team is to be peaking late February, early March as the Big East regular season ends and as the Big East tournament begins, so that this team can go into the NCAA tournament running on all cylinders.
You are absolutely right. One of the fan comments, Robert F4Y1A, said Zuby was on the bench too long in the second half. He also said they should have gone with a 1-3-1 zone. I'm going to leave that comment to you in a second. We've discussed that. What I am going to talk about is the fact that the opportunity for St. John's coming off this loss is actually going to be more energetic than the opportunity for Alabama going up against Purdue next. And that's for the Alabama, fans to kind of think about. But coming off this win, Alabama came into Madison Square Garden ranked number 15. Now they're going up against number 1 Purdue. And although I think Houston actually flip-flopped with them this week, but the point is that they've got a superior challenge going up against another top 10 team, whereas St. John's is going up against William and Mary this Saturday. And that gives them a little bit of breathing room. It gives them a chance to reset themselves. I do want to bring up to your point about Rick having to figure out the right lineup and how to play these guys. Dylan Mitchell. Everybody is looking at Dylan Mitchell and trying to figure out, what's this guy really about? What's his potential? Where is he going to fit in this lineup? Right now, Dylan Mitchell, in my eyes, based on what I saw on the floor, is still underperforming. And this is not to say anything about his effort, but it is to say that from the standpoint of his confidence and his composure, really being able to take it to the other team, I think he was one of the lost factors in the Alabama game. he did not show up and dominate the way that they needed him to. And he really wasn't a factor in the game. Whereas on the other side, Bowen was absolutely amazing, in the same capacity, playing, between, forward guard and doing everything that Alabama needed. And that was one of the things that I think changed the whole flow and dimension of the game, was how Alabama's, lesser players and bench players really stood up and showed themselves in this game in a way that, even though St. John's players, were in the game, nobody really rose to match Zuby and Hopkins, in terms of not only output, but just stability.
I agree. Dennis Mitchell, only 7 points in 29 minutes. I don't want to single him out because everybody was horrible on the defensive end, but he was horrible on the defensive end. And in a game where the team combined to score 199 points, to only have 7 points in 29 minutes is a little disappointing. That's again another reason why Shannon had 7 points in 25 minutes as well. So that's two starters in the loss that had a combined 14 points in a combined 54 minutes, whereas Ian Jackson, who came off the bench, had 23 points in 14 minutes. Once you figure out this game is going to be a shootout, our defense is horrible. Their defense is horrible. You have to get your best offensive players in the game. And the most disappointing thing about Mitchell, he'd even let the ball go. He took only 2 shots in those 29 minutes. At least Shannon, he didn't shoot the ball well. He did take 6 shots. He missed 5 of them, but he did shoot the ball. But to be on the court and only take 2 shots in 29 minutes, that is certainly not why Rick Pitino has you out there, especially in a free-flowing game where, defense was lacking on both sides.
Yes. And, to that point, this happened last season. The big difference I see between last season and this season is the fact that St. John's now has a target on their back. Last year, St. John's was the surprise to everybody, and their resilience was what got them to where they needed to be, because they dominated in the second half of every game. As the season went on, it became the relentless pursuit of, St. John's being able to shut a team down in the second half. This St. John's team has the caliber of players to not only do the same thing, but to, dominate even further. And to your point, they got caught up, as Rick Pitino even admitted, in the trap of Alabama. And they wound up playing Alabama's game rather than their own, getting into that shootout, as you talk about. And outside of Zuby and Hopkins, they didn't really get the production from their players. And guys like Mitchell didn't show the confidence or the command of their game, which, again, Mitchell has incredible ability and incredible command when he exerts it. But in this game, he seemed tentative. He seemed unsure. He wasn't really the factor that everybody needed him to be on that team, and obviously that the fans were looking for. I also want to point out that outside of Sadiku Ayo, who's the other returning player, there weren't a lot of guards in the rotation. Obviously, they lost Dylan Darling, but you had Jackson, you had Mitchell, you had Shannon, and Ayo was going back and forth, really giving a breather for them. You didn't really see a lot. He did bring Poto in, for a little stretch. But Pitino kind of, clamped down on minutes. He didn't give Lefteris any minutes, probably, again, to your point, could have had the opportunity to get into a shootout, but felt that Lefteris wasn't going to offer, what they needed on defense in order for them to be able to, make a difference in the game. And I think that's one of the questions that we're going to be looking at for the upcoming games, as well as going later into the season, is what is Pitino looking for in his players that's going to give them the minutes and actually make a difference, for them as well as the team. Because there was a great shooting performance exhibited by St. John's. They shot the highest percentage I think they've shot in the last 2 seasons at 49%. But it wasn't a dominating performance. It wasn't a purposeful performance. And I think that's why they lost, was because they did a lot of things well, but they didn't do the key things, the core things that really need to happen. And, the other thing that I want to, point out here, going back to Alabama's toughness, is the fact that this St. John's team is not the tough team that they were last year. That's what I think they have to find in these upcoming games and in that four game stint in Las Vegas. That toughness is really going to be either shown and the cauldron is going to be bubbling, to your point, or we're going to see a very, very different team in December.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit on the toughness. I don't think this team lost this game because they lack toughness. I think it was the toughness that this team has that enabled them to take the lead in the second half in a game where they played horribly. I mean, if we're being honest, they played horribly on defense. I criticized Pitino for not starting Ian Jackson. Zuby himself said he could have played better. Zuby did offensively 27 points, 5 offensive rebounds, 10 rebounds overall. So when you have 5 offensive rebounds and 10 rebounds overall, Zuby needed to do a better job on the defensive boards. Alabama not only out-rebounded St. John's, but I believe they were +4 on the offensive boards, which was a big shock. When we went into this game, obviously they had an advantage at the guards. St. John's had an advantage in the front court, and that did play out in terms of domination in points. But when Zuby only gets 5 defensive boards, Hopkins didn't show up on the boards either. Looking at his numbers, he had 4 combined rebounds. He had 4 rebounds, and both Zuby also had 4 turnovers. Osiah Sellers also had 4 turnovers. You can't have a guard having 4 turnovers.
Yeah, especially when the Alabama guards had 1 combined.
Yes, and I think so. So I would push back on this team not lacking toughness. I think what they lack is cohesion, and that's something that we expected. I think obviously there are several ways this game could have went. Obviously, a win would have been the best case scenario. Losing a 7-point game at home is a tough pill to swallow, but because this team is so new in terms of playing together, I would love to see these 2 teams match up in the NCAA tournament, and we may get a different result if these teams were to meet somewhere down the line in March. Because though I think Alabama will be a better team as well by March, I think St. John's will be a well-oiled machine as a product of Rick Pitino and his cauldron, and finding out which players on the roster played the best together, which
You're
pieces to bring off the bench, to take advantage of advantages he sees on the court.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Opal Rudy 2526 said exactly that. Derrel, look for these two Titans to meet again when it actually matters. Owen Schreier 5233 said, good game, y'all. Lots to be excited for if you're a Johnny's fan. And I do agree in both counts, as well as with your pushback. It absolutely is fair to challenge me on the toughness aspect. I think I'm talking about the toughness in terms of their mental mistakes at the end of the game. I'm not questioning the effort that this team put out in terms of that toughness. But to your point, and this is Rick Pitino's mastery, he is a master in terms of psychological pressure and getting the toughness out of his players over the course of a season where they become very, very tough mentally as well as physically because of the relentless chaos that he ensues on every team with his defense. I think one of the things to look for as the season goes on is how players like Mitchell, Sannon, Jackson play between the three of them with a little bit more shrewdness in a position of both guard and forward, because Pitino is going to make rotations where you're going to see players in unusual situations in terms of how they're on the floor. To that point, look at Ejiofor being a point center at times, bringing the ball up and making some great passes. And at other times, the same thing could be said for Hopkins. The same thing could be said for Ruben Prey. He's not afraid to challenge his players to play in unusual, unique roles because he wants them to look at themselves as part of a bigger system that plays together. And that's the team resilience concept that I think Rick Pitino is so good at, is getting his players out of just focusing on a single role that they might be really, really good at and getting them into focusing on things that they probably don't do well otherwise. So, for example, one of the things about this St. John's team, especially the guards, to your point, rebounding. St. John's has now been out-rebounded by Michigan and by Alabama. And although the Michigan, contest was preseason, didn't matter, it was still very, very apparent that the guards need to do a much better job of rebounding. Same thing here at Alabama. St. John's was absolutely dominated on the boards early. Oates even said it, that they came back in the second half, later in the second half, and brought it close. So it was a 43-42 advantage. But the truth was, for the longest time, Alabama had a clear advantage on the boards. To your point, Zuby and Hopkins were great offensively, but Alabama got 14 offensive rebounds. And that was a big part of it, why they were able to succeed at dominating the game in many parts of the contest, was because they got the ball so many times. Now, that being said, I think going forward, looking at the William and Mary game this weekend, you've got to imagine that Pitino's focus is going to be on how all of those players get together on the boards and have basically a contest, internally with the team for who's going to get the most boards. I don't know if that's necessarily, something Pitino would do, but at the same time, I've got to imagine that he's telling his guys that we've got to get 50 boards this game and we've got to hold them to, under 35, something to that degree.
I strongly agree, and I yes, the guards obviously have to help rebounding, but when Zuby and Hopkins combined for I think it was 8 defensive boards. Osiah Sellers had 7 defensive boards. So the focus, Zuby, he's the most imposing figure on this team. He is a captain on this team. He absolutely, and I'm sure Rick will challenge him, and he will challenge himself. He said he has to be better. I agree with Zuby. He does have to be better. He can't turn the ball over 4 times. He can't only have 5 defensive boards. I love the 5 offensive boards, but you know that has to be. He's got to be 13, 14, 15 rebounds in that game. He has to impose his will on the defensive boards for this team.
I have to also point out how exciting is it to be talking about Zuby in this way in November when he had 27-10, and we're saying he has to get better and he's willing to take it on his shoulders. This is early November, and this guy already is humbling himself to the opportunity to be even better and showcase himself in a way that, just makes you salivate for March in terms of what Zuby Ejiofor is going to look like. I also want to point out one other, thing about this game that I really credit Ejiofor for. He did this last year, and he's already doing it this year, and that is his continued work on his footwork. He continues to improve that aspect of his game in a way that you saw some moves on offense, both away from the ball as well as with the ball, that were absolutely superstar quality. And his confidence in his footwork, I think, is what is really exciting to watch about Ejiofor, because he's not your typical player in that position. Again, he's a 6'9" center, which is short for the NBA, but at the same time, he's got incredible footwork, incredible jumping skills, and he's showing and demonstrating his ball handling and passing ability. And I think this season's going to be very, very exciting to watch his continued growth within this team and how all of the players feed off of him. So I really give Rick Pitino credit for his organizational development and his plan around Ejiofor, which I think, again, not since Kentucky has Pitino really had a player like this that you can call special, because it's not just his talent, it is his mental fortitude and eagerness to continue to grow in the game.
Absolutely. And just to echo some things that you said, Zuby now is not only a credible jump shooter, he's a credible 3-point shooter, which, if you're going to play at the next level, you have to be able to space the floor. Basketball has certainly changed so much over the last 3 decades in the way that big men play the game. You have big men. Wemby is a 3-point shooter, and he's 7'5". Joel Embiid shoots threes when he's able to stay on the court. So the game is totally different than it was, in the 90s when you had Shaquille O'Neal and Patrick Ewing and Hakeem Olajuwon dominating the paint. To be a big man in the league, unless you're a super talented player, you have to be able to space the floor. And Zuby is showing that he can do that and can be a viable power forward in the NBA next year and going into the future.
Yeah, and the final point I want to make before I give you the last word, Derrel, is to the point, going back to Pitino's work with this cauldron, and really developing each one of these talents into a sharp sword that he can put on the floor. You look at where Zuby was last year and how he developed R.J. Lewis Jr. and Kadari Richmond and Zuby as his 3 focal points, and he built around them. He has Zuby this year. He has a couple of returning players, credit to Ruben Prey, who's definitely showing up and, obviously will continue to improve. But I think what's most exciting, again, to the point of the team's toughness, as we discussed earlier and alluded to, is the mental development, the psychological component, that if this team can get stronger mentally in terms of shutting teams down in the second half and closing them out. Okay, Alabama was a missed opportunity. That's all it was. It was an early season test. It was absolutely a fantastic match, but it was a missed opportunity. And the privilege of watching this team, to your point, of Zuby becoming a very dynamic player that can shoot outside, can shoot inside, can take it to, the other team's big man with confidence. The real missed opportunity, ironically enough, no pun intended, in this game was the fact that St. John's had 40 foul shots and only hit 28. And that is always one of those tough things, for, a coach like Rick Pitino, who knows that the charity stripe is one of the biggest places to win or lose a game. And it's not that St. John shot badly at 28 for 40. That's 70%. Unfortunately, against a team like Alabama, it was a missed opportunity because had they shot 80, 85%, that might have been the difference that made the game. And that's what they've got to also focus on going forward. And a credit to Ejiofor, who last year was more like a 50% shooter. You can tell he's worked on that part of his game. And he didn't have the best game, but he shot, I think, 75%. And, that was, acceptable, but it has to be better.
Absolutely. It does have to be better. And I'm very confident that it will be better. Again, this is this game could have had a lot of different outcomes. Yes, they could have won the game, uh, but they also could have got blown out. And there were some times in the game where it looked like Alabama could run away with it, and the team showed toughness by not only hanging in there but being able to take the lead in the second half. So uh, I am certainly not worried this early in the season. I think it would be foolish to be worried uh, this early in the season. Um, should you be concerned about the lack of defensive rebounding? Yes, but I wouldn't say worried. I would say concerned because I believe it's something that can be corrected when you have an imposing physical presence like Zuby Ejiofor on the team.
Excellent. Derrel, you get the chance to give your closing word for this episode.
Well, one thing I did want to reach out. Of course, this is Rick Pitino's third season at the helm of the St. John's Red Storm. When he took the job at St. John's, he brought Danish Jenkins with him from Iona. And Monday night, Dennis had a career high 24 points in a win, in a 137-103 win over the Washington Wizards for the Detroit Pistons. So it's always good to see St. John's players doing well, and Jenkins is doing well in his second season in the NBA. Again, ultimately, rankings don't matter right now. It's all about developing the cohesiveness for this team, so that they peak late February, early March, going into the NCAA tournament. And for those biggest St. John's fans out there, those who bleed with the Red Storm, no need to panic. In Rick, we trust with this team, and Rick will have this red Red Storm team firing on all cylinders when we need them to be. And right now is not when they need to be firing on all cylinders. Would it be great? Absolutely. Would it have been great for them to have pulled off a 107-103 thrilling home win against Alabama? Absolutely. But that's not the way it is. It's not going to be easy, but I still believe that this team can be special and will be special in March.
You've just been in the eye of the storm, but the conversation doesn't end here. Join us online, hit subscribe, and share your take. Where passion meets perspective, that's the Relentless Red Storm. Until next time, stay focused, stay fiery, and as always, stay relentless.